Tonight, is it time to bring back ethical oil? It's July 12th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you, you censorious thug.
I saw this big headline, front page of the Globe and Mail today. I don't know if you saw it. It goes, Canadian envoy, that means diplomat, summoned by Kiev over Russian turbines. Zelensky, that's the head of Ukraine, calls equipment export plans an absolutely unacceptable exception to sanctions. That was their news story. And then they published this commentary in the Globe and Mail also. Ottawa says it stands with Ukraine. Its decision to return turbines to Russia suggests otherwise. And here's the first two paragraphs, which sum up the news pretty well. This is from the commentary. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was right when he said that Ottawa's decision to skirt its own sanctions law and send Nord Stream 1, that's the name of a pipeline, gas turbines back to Russia via Germany was, quote, absolutely unacceptable. The 6 Russian turbines that the German company Siemens Energy had been servicing in Montreal, but which became stranded owing to sanctions on Moscow, had been a bilateral irritant between Ottawa and Kiev for some time. The Russian government had claimed that the missing equipment was the reason it reduced the flow of natural gas to Germany through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, prompting Berlin to press Justin Trudeau's government for the turbine's release. But this week, Canada actively amended its own sanctions laws in order to return them to Germany, which will then turn them over to Russia. Now, I'll skip a bit, but I thought this next paragraph was pretty punchy. And you tell me what you think of this. Put aside your thoughts on Russia and Ukraine. I think this is a factual statement. You tell me what you think of it. Oil and gas exports on average generate more than $100 billion a year for the Kremlin, which in turn helps fund its invasion of Ukraine. Russia is incredibly unimportant in the global economy, except for oil and gas, economist and Obama White House advisor Jason Furman told the New York Times. It's basically a big gas station. What do you think about that? You know what? Statistically speaking, he's right. Obviously, there are lots of minerals and there's lots of agriculture. But in terms of just foreign exports, oil and gas are the thing. Russia is pretty much tied for first place, a 3-way tie with Russia, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. All are making about 10 million barrels a day. And Russia is huge into natural gas. Gazprom, you've probably heard of it. It's the world's largest gas company, natural gas, that is. And that's what they're talking about, the Nord Stream pipeline. All this gas goes to Europe, and I mean Western Europe. I mean Germany and other countries. So do they mean it or not, these sanctions? Now, I wrote 2 books about this strange thing, this phenomenon of buying oil and gas from your enemies. First one was called Ethical Oil, the case for Canada's oil sands. It was about ethical oil versus conflict oil, and then I wrote a book called Groundswell. I just want to talk about that for 1 minute because I used to really focus on that. It was the number one thing I talked about. I wrote the book more than a decade ago. Obviously, since then, a lot of things have changed in the world, including my position. I'm now with Rebel News, and we talk about many things. In the last 2 years, we've talked about the pandemic, the lockdowns, the civil liberties fiasco. But if you've ever been to my office, and we don't have a lot of visitors around here, I have a few things hung up on my wall that I'm proud of. And I took 2 things off the wall and I brought them into the studio. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. This is on my wall, and I don't think it's vanity. It's more a remembrance of what I thought was an achievement. My book, Ethical Oil, actually won the National Business Book Award of the Year in 2011. It was a jury that made the decision. Peter Mansbridge was the head of the jury. The sponsor, a couple of banks sponsored it, plus the Globe and Mail. I was so stunned when I won. I was invited because I was a finalist, and I thought there's no chance I'm going to win. I went to this thing because I thought, all right, I should, out of courtesy, go to the lunch. It was at a fancy lunch. It was at the Four Seasons. Michael Ignatieff was right in line there. Like, I thought, boy, am I out of my element. And I thought, oh, grumble, grumble, grumble. Why am I wasting my time here? And then I heard Peter Mansbridge say, and the winner is Ethical Oil by Ezra Levant. I remember that moment. My reaction was, what? I didn't even say hooray, because I was practically ignoring him, because I thought, I don't even know why I'm going through the motions. And my reaction when Mansbridge said I won was, what? No way. And I got up there and I just couldn't believe it. And I told some jokes, but I won. And I went on to create something called Ethical Oil, the advocacy group, a website, and it was a big thing. I want to show you one more thing that I hang on my wall because I'm proud of it. Now, this is a little harder to see. I trademarked it, Ethical Oil. And the reason I did that is I don't think I would have thought of trademarking the word ethical oil other than environmental activists, when they saw my book's success and they saw I had set up this website, ethicaloil.org, and that I was really fighting that project, they tried to register that trademark so I couldn't use that. Those environmentalists are so tricky. I had to go to court to protect the rights to ethical oil because someone else had seized it and tried to trademark it. I tell you that as a reminder to myself and to you, actually, that I've been thinking about this issue of ethical oil versus conflict oil for more than a decade. And just to sum it up, I used a tactic that I think was effective, even though it's being denounced by the left. I think that's why they denounce it. Instead of talking about oil and gas from a right-winger's perspective, I tried to use the language of the left. I talked about an imaginary young grad student named Zoe, who, vegetarian activist, peace activist, someone really progressive. What would she care about? Not what do I care about? And I really listened to the critics, the good faith critics of the oil patch, and they had four things they seemed to care about. The environment, obviously. Peace, obviously. The treatment of workers, how well are they paid? Are they safe? And finally, even though we sort of take it for granted, civil liberties. Treatment of minorities, a religious minority or indigenous people or women, or if you're gay. Those are the four things that this imaginary person I called Zoe cared about in the world. Environmental responsibility, peace, as in you're not using the proceeds of oil to wage a war or terrorism. Economic justice, as they would say, you're paying people a minimum wage. Are you paying people a living wage? Compare people what they earn in the oil patch to, people in Nigeria or Dubai. And finally, civil rights. So don't even get me started on the difference between civil rights here and in many OPEC regimes in Russia. So in my book, Ethical Oil, and I gave a ton of speeches on the subject, it really used to be my thing, I said, Canada's oil sands oil, when you compare it to any other alternative, not some fantasy fuel of the future that hasn't been invented yet, like that movie Avatar where they talked about unobtainium, this perfect energy source, perfect in every way other than it's not real. If you're going to fill up your car with gas next week, it's going to come from gas, not from a mystery fuel. And that gas comes from oil that comes from somewhere. And if it's not coming from Canada or the United States, two of the most ethical places in the world, it's coming from, odds are, a dictatorship or a warmonger. Look at the countries in OPEC. Russia's not in OPEC, but it's one of the largest producers. Venezuela, Nigeria, Iraq, Iran, Sudan. So if you are not getting oil from Canada, you're getting it from a place that is terrible, that treats its own citizens terribly. And I said that Canadian oil is the fair trade coffee of the world's oil industry. The book did well because it didn't challenge the left on their beliefs. It accepted them. It held them to their own standards. And I must have given 100 speeches on that book across the country and even in Europe. I remember I gave a speech in Frankfurt and a speech in Munich. It was actually translated into German. People had never heard that point of view before. And I did a lot of speeches in the oil patch itself, even in Calgary, even in oil companies. And sometimes people say, well, why are you wasting your time talking to the true believers? And I said, no, actually, that's the crazy thing. Within these oil companies are often people who have bought the line that oil is evil and we need to transition out of it. They felt like they were working for a tobacco company. Oh, it's so disreputable. Oh, it's so terrible. I'm ashamed I work there. In fact, oil is not evil at all. Oil and all other sorts of fossil fuel energy lift us out of poverty and keep us warm in the winter, cool in the summer, allow us freedom to drive and move and lower the cost of living and bringing food to market. Everything we touch is because of fossil fuels. Imagine life without an ambulance or a fire truck that run on fossil fuels. Maybe one day we'll get that unobtainium. Maybe one day Tesla cars will be able to go a little further and they'll be recharged on something other than coal-fired electricity. Maybe one day. Maybe they'll be affordable one day. But my point is, until that happy day comes, you're buying gas. Now, whether or not that gas is made from Canadian oil or Saudi oil is up to us. That's the thesis of ethical oil. And it applies even more so to gas, as in natural gas. Because Europe, contrary to Ronald Reagan's warning 40 years ago, and contrary to Donald Trump's representations even the last few years, buying your oil and especially your natural gas from Russia is crazy. But they did anyways. Today, funny thing happened today. Let me read you this tweet. This tweet's from yesterday, I think, or maybe it's a couple days ago. The tweet a couple days ago said, tomorrow, Russia will take Nord Stream 1 offline. That's this big gas pipeline that these turbines are going back to. There will be a major potential for escalation of the geopolitical and energy crisis. So here's a thread on why not to panic now when you might want to, and just one on Earth is EU Regulation 2017-1938. If those turbines hadn't gone back to Germany and on their way back to Russia, it absolutely would have had a shocking domino effect. And I'll tell you about that. Now, it still might. Vladimir Putin still might say, oh, we closed this pipeline for maintenance and we discovered all these problems. And I'm sorry, Germany, you get 40% of your energy from Russia, but we have to turn it off. They would have done that for sure had Trudeau not agreed to send the turbines back to Germany, back to Russia. And that's the point. Are sanctions only going to be deployed if they're easy and cost-free? Or are you going to deploy sanctions at some cost? Now, it wouldn't have been a big cost to Canada to keep those turbines, but it would have flattened Germany's economy. Imagine if Russia said, sorry, mate, we're not turning the gas pipeline back on. Why don't you make do with some more wind turbines? So Canada is unserious about sanctions, and Germany is unserious about sanctions. If the only way you do sanctions is if you make them cost-free, if you really aren't as brave as you are in your photo ops, then you'd better get Western Europe, Germany in particular, and other countries off of conflict oil and replace it with Canadian ethical oil, if you're serious. Trump said this. They laughed at him. He talked about energy independence. He talked about how insane it was buying your energy from Russia. He said that in September 2018 when he went to Germany. Look at this headline in the Washington Post. They're so proud of themselves. This is the Washington Post. Trump accused Germany of becoming totally dependent on Russian energy at the UN. The Germans just smirked. And the Washington Post smirked along with them. I don't think Trump accused anyone of anything. He said, guys, you're crazy to rely on Vladimir Putin for your gas. They said, no, we're smirking, you dummy. Now, here we are in 2022, and Trudeau gives the turbines back, which is the right move. Because really, does Canada want to destroy Germany's economy? Let Germany decide whether or not to destroy Germany's economy by deciding to no longer buy Russian gas. They can do that, but they don't really mean it. Trudeau is one of the few world leaders who could actually help with the underlying problem. But he refuses. He could build oil and gas pipelines, oil pipelines to the coast. He could build fracking and allow natural gas in those special ships called LNG, liquefied natural gas, we could actually ship both oil and gas to Europe, including to Germany. Ethical oil, not conflict oil. Oil that we would be prepared, created, produced, drilled, exported with those four things that Zoe cares about: environmental responsibility, peace, the treatment of workers, and civil rights, as opposed to Russian natural gas. Environmental responsibility, you think Russia cares about the environment? Peace? No, they're invaders. Treatment of workers? Yeah, I don't think they get paid well in Russia. And civil rights, so don't even get me started. Russia, their population and their economy are both 1/10 the size of China. If we're not serious about putting sanctions on Russia, how would we ever be serious about putting sanctions on China? It goes to the cowardice of our population, of our political leaders. We're not serious about any discomfort, are we? But we could actually do what Trump did. We could actually do what Harper was trying to do. Get our oil and gas to market to free the world, to give people a choice. India and China will always buy oil from Russia and Iran. They don't care. But for places like Germany and others that do, why don't we give them an ethical alternative? The oil sands, Canada has about 171 billion barrels of oil, of which 166 billion are in the oil sands. It's like almost all of it. There is some offshore and there is some fracking. That is stranded because Joe Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline that was going to bring 800,000 barrels a day down to America. That could theoretically have gone on to export. But Trudeau himself and Gerald Butts canceled the Northern Gateway pipeline that would have gone to the West Coast, the Trans Mountain pipeline that would have gone to the West Coast. It was actually already there. It was just going to be expanded in size. And the Energy East pipeline, which would have taken Alberta energy all the way to New Brunswick, which, by the way, is Canada's largest refinery. Right now, they refine foreign oil, including, I don't know if they still do in the last few months, but they've been refining Russian oil for years. That's the only permanent solution. And it's a win-win-win. It's a win for Canadian oil and gas producers. It's a win for the billions of dollars making the pipelines. It's a win because you get secure, ethical oil into Canadian markets. You're not importing it from the United States, as oddly enough we do out east, or from OPEC. And it's a win for the world because every barrel of oil that you buy from Canada is 1 barrel of oil less than you buy from Russia, Iraq, Iran, Nigeria, Sudan, Venezuela. It's $100 more to Alberta and to Canada and $100 less to the bad guys. So I was thinking about this when I saw this incredibly obvious and easy to predict dilemma on the front page of the Globe and Mail today. The Globe and Mail wasn't actually mad about turbines. They weren't actually mad about Germany. Those were the outward expressions of the problem. The deeper problem is what they smirked at Donald Trump about, is that the West is dependent on Russia. Now, don't get me started about how dependent we are on China. But it is true. Russia is a gas station for Europe. Natural gas, oil, and the things that come from oil. That is not going to stop by building some wind turbines. You don't drive a car based on wind turbines. You don't heat your home with wind turbines. That will only stop if Canadian ethical oil can get to market. And I mentioned that I sort of saw this coming, and I gave speeches a decade ago when I made a lot of fun of Vladimir Putin. I wrote a book about it. I gave speeches about it. I have some activism and did some punditry. I've got the trademark to show it. And so I saw this today, and I thought, I think I'm going to revive ethical oil. As in, 10 years ago, I set up this little NGO. We had a website. We had a spokesman. We did little campaigns. We did, it was fun. It was small. It was a part-time thing I was doing as a volunteer while I worked at Sun News. It still did some great stuff. Then I got busy with Rebel News and I sort of focused on other things. But don't you think it's important to bring it back now? Here's what I mean. What would it mean to revive ethical oil on our website, ethicaloil.org? That was my website back then. What would it mean to do that now? Well, I think it would do journalism, right? I mean, back then when I was at Sun News, I wasn't the boss. I didn't command a team of journalists. I just had my nightly show. And sure, I talked about ethical oil, but now I got Rebel News. We got 70 people here. We got well over a dozen reporters in Canada alone. We could make the oil beat a full-time beat. I mean, everyone could talk about it, but we could hire a full-time ethical oil journalist to talk about these stories, not just of ethical oil and gas in Canada, but to contrast it with conflict oil from Russia, Nigeria, Iraq, etc. And that quickly got me thinking, well, you know, we did just the other month, and it was a great success. We made a documentary film. I don't know if you heard about that. We made a film called Trucker Rebellion, the inside story of the Coutts Blockade. And not only was it a hit at our premieres, but it's been showing in movie theaters every week. A few, but you know, it's a great start. What would happen if we did something I didn't have the resources to do 10 years ago? What if we sent a great Rebel News documentary camera crew, bear with me, around the world to document the difference between ethical oil and conflict oil? To go to Nigeria and look at the pollution. To go to some of the Gulf states and look at how the indentured workers are paid nothing while the Saudi princes polish the gold on their Rolls Royces. I don't think I would send our people into Russia, too dangerous, but maybe into Venezuela to look at where conflict oil comes from, and to go to Germany and show how on their knees they are, and to the Baltic states, which even get more from Russia. Wouldn't it be great to have a theatrical quality, cinema quality documentary on ethical oil? Do it right. Travel to those places with a great camera crew and do a theater quality documentary called Ethical Oil. Things that I wish I could have done a decade ago had I had the tools. Hire a full-time investigative reporter on the ethical oil beat to look into the critics of ethical oil. Who's funding them? Who's directing them? I think there's a lot of things ethical oil could do now using the strength of Rebel News and the tools that we have and the team that we have and the experience that we have that I couldn't really do a decade ago when I just wrote the book and had sort of this little volunteer group that I had set up as a part-time hobby. I've still got the trademark. I've still got the book. I should revise and update the book. And I thought about this when I was reading that story on the front page of the Globe and Mail, because the Globe and Mail, just like those Germans to Donald Trump, they smirked and sneered at the idea of ethical oil. Ha! Ethical oil! No such thing! Really? Maybe 10 years ago, if they would have supported the idea of ethical oil and promoted the pipelines to the coast, both for oil sands oil and for Canadian fracked natural gas, instead of having to give the turbines back to Germany to give back to Russia, it wouldn't even be an issue, because instead of a Nord Stream 1 pipeline, we'd have Canadian pipelines to the coast and then LNG ships and oil tankers taking Canadian ethical oil to Germany. They smirked at Donald Trump and they smirked at ethical oil. Well, the only person smirking now, thanks to that anti-development philosophy, is Vladimir Putin himself. Well, I think I'm going to do it. We're going to start it up. ethicaloil.org. That's the website I used for my little NGO a decade ago. I want to raise a budget to do the documentary film and to do it properly, to travel to those places around the world with a team, not just one or two guys, but like 4 guys, to do it right, to have something that's so high quality, movie theaters will say, we've got to have that. I think that film alone could be $100,000 or $150,000, including travel, to have a beautiful theatrical quality movie called Ethical Oil. I want to hire a full-time reporter on the beat, maybe 2, including that investigative journalist I talked about. That's another $100,000 and some $1,000 a year too. I want to get back into the ad project, billboards and leaflets and pamphlets, reminding people how nasty conflict oil is. One of the things I talked about back when I ran ethicaloil.org was we have country of origin labeling for almost everything in our life. You know what I mean? If you look at the tag on your clothing, it says where it was made. If you look at every toy, every tool, your food has country of origin labeling. Almost everything you buy has country of origin labeling. And so if you care, you can choose. You can try and not use something made in China. Good luck with that. But the one thing that doesn't have country of origin labeling on it, and you know why, is gasoline. Because if you had one gas station on this side of the road advertising 100% ethical oil made in Canada, gasoline, and on the other side, you had our gasoline made from oil from Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan. If the price was equal, you'd go to the Canadian oil. And in fact, some people would probably buy the Canadian oil even if it was more expensive, which it shouldn't be, of course. Now, some people wouldn't care. Some people would buy the cheapest oil in the world because they're on a budget and they just can't afford to care. Okay, well, that's no worse off than we are right now. But why don't we have country of origin labeling? Do you really want to buy oil and gas products that come from Russia or Saudi Arabia, especially if you have an ethical alternative in the form of Canada? So I want to revive ethicaloil.org as the website that hosts these things. I ran it a decade ago, and I think we made a dent. I think we made a difference, even if the Globe and Mail smirked about it. Now, we've got to do it, and we've got to do it with the tools at our disposal. I didn't have the email lists. I didn't have the viewers on the YouTube channel. I didn't even have a YouTube channel back then. I want to revive the Ethical Oil Project. I want to do it as a journalistic project, as a documentary project, and as a campaign project, like we've done with so many things. If you believe in this idea too, go to ethicaloil.org and let's get going. Stay with me for more.